Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today I'm interviewing Gregg Doud. Now, in today's episode with Gregg, I'll be doing a deep dive into global trade. Now, very few farmers ever get to see how decisions are actually made on global trade and who's really sitting in the rooms when the leverage is applied. Now, my guest today is one of the rare people who's lived that out, and we're not really going to have a big discussion or spend a lot of time on debating the outcomes of the trade being good or bad, but more so, I really wanted to get to a good understanding of the process and how it actually works, how the sausage is actually made when it comes to global trade. Now, Gregg Doud's current role is the president and CEO of the National Milk Producers Federation. But before that, Gregg had served under Trump 1.0 as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator in the Office of the United States Trade Representative. I felt this conversation with Gregg really did this topic justice. It's something that not very many people could really talk on from the inside, being on the inside of these negotiations. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So listen up to my conversation with Gregg Doud. Well, Gregg Doud, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast. It's so good to have you here today.
Paul, it is a pleasure. Nice to be able to spend some time with you here. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Really excited about it because for a while I've been searching for somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, has personal experience in something that I feel is very important, which is trade negotiations. And you have personal experience making the sausage, so looking forward to the conversation about that. But before we get into that, deep dive into that, tell us what your role was. You were on the Trump 1.0 term team. So tell us about what your role was with that and what your day-to-day responsibilities were in that role.
To preface all this, Paul, I'm just a farm kid from north central Kansas. So I grew up on we had hogs, a lot of hogs, 50 head of cows in a cow-calf operation and farmed, close to 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 acres, somewhere in there back in the height of it in the mid-1980s. I graduated from high school in Mankato, Kansas, 1985. And to give you perspective, in our hometown was Dubuque Packing Company, beef packing plant. In those days, there were about 5,500, 6,000 people in the county. That plant closed in 1985 because they refused to convert it from swinging sides to box beef. This was during the innovation of box beef. And today that county is probably the poorest or second poorest county in Kansas with less than 3,000 people. There is no other economy other than farming today. And so bachelor's and master's at K-State, and was an AGR and a state FFA officer and all that. Started out in the wheat industry. They brought me to DC in 1992. Went on to be a private sector commodity analyst, economist type person. Then I was the chief economist for the Cattlemen, Senate Ag Committee, ran the Commodity Markets Council, which deals with all the futures trading issues, and then got a phone call to be the Chief Agricultural Negotiator in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. So you're saying, well, what help me understand what all that means? Well, USTR is a very unique government agency. It's about 230 people. It is across the street from the White House, across the street from the Eisenhower Executive Office building where all the White House people are. And it is the oldest office building in Washington, D.C. Yep. It was the headquarters for the Civil War across the street from the White House back in the day. And still have a lot of Civil War pictures on the wall. It's really an interesting place. And the way that works from a political standpoint is you have the U.S. Trade Representative, who my boss was Robert Lighthizer, very famous guy. who, by the way, in the 80s, he used to work for Senator Bob Dole from Kansas. And he was his staff director on when Dole was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee before he was leader. And then you have two deputy USTRs. One does half the world, one does the other half of the world. You have one deputy USTR at the WTO in Geneva, and then you have this diving board over to the deputy that is the Chief Ag Negotiator. And how did they come up with that? Senator Grassley put that into law, and I think in 1994 after NAFTA is when they negotiated all this stuff. And even Bob, early on, the first few days, he was like, I don't even know why we have an ag negotiator, what we do. And as we were starting to do Canada and Mexico and creating USMCA, he was like, man, this stuff is really technical. I don't have time for this. Greg, you just handle it. And so the ag portfolio, U.S. agricultural exports, most people don't realize one of the biggest categories of things the U.S. exports is agriculture.
Agricultural products, yeah.
What back and forth, what would be the other big thing that we export? Can you tell me what it is?
I'm guessing energy.
Actually, it is a big thing, but it's airplanes, aeronautical.
Oh, yep. Boeing.
It would be Boeing.
Lockheed Martin.
Exactly. So those are ag and aircraft are the two biggies. And agricultural exports, generally speaking today, think of it in terms of 175 billion, plus or minus. So that was my portfolio.
Big numbers.
Is all of the ag commodities we export, not counting, and this doesn't count fertilizer and all of that kind of stuff. Just that's an industrial product. So beef, pork, poultry, wheat, corn, soybeans, fruits and vegetables. But and that's on the export side. We're also a major importer, as you know, Paul, fruits and vegetables, etc. All that's on the portfolio too, but that didn't even count in the 175 billion. So whether it's coming in or going out, in terms of anything food, that's the job. So
in that role, I'm guessing when you first got in there's probably a lot to learn, trying to keep your head above water. What was the biggest surprise that you learned about dealing with trade around the world and what you first stepped into when you got into that role? So
the history on that, how did you be known as a person that could do that coming in from the outside? And the answer is, in 2003, we had mad cow disease, where the beef industry lost all of its exports in one day. Every single export market closed in one day. And I spent 7 years after that, day after day after day, reopening countries for U.S. beef exports, working with USTR and the State Department and USDA and the industry. And it was just triage every single day for 7 years, getting markets open. And from then, I went to the Senate Ag Committee, where I helped write the trade title of the Farm Bill. So that dealt with all the market promotion and all the food aid stuff, and exposure to all the international issues from that vantage point. That Senate Ag Committee experience was in the combination of the technical skills of my background. So I'm an animal science pre-vet undergrad at K-State, and then a master's in Ag Econ. So, when you're talking about all this non-tariff trade barrier, scientific regulatory stuff, I can have those conversations. I get how all that works. And so you do mad cow, you do all that. So what the most interesting thing was, all those years of doing that, I was barely prepared for this job.
And you knew the inner workings, you knew the people, you knew all of that stuff, and you still felt...
Yeah, and knew the members of Congress, knew everybody in the bureaucracy. Yes, that's correct. And so I'll tell you the story. My first day on the job, it's about 6 o'clock at night, and things are winding up for the day, and the head career person, the assistant USTR for agriculture, I called her the GOAT, greatest of all time, the great Sharon Bomer, who was one of the most unbelievable people that ever worked in our government. She's retired here a few years ago. The person that replaced her is actually going to take this chief ag negotiator job. Her name is Dr. Julie Callahan. Julie will be confirmed this week as the next chief ag negotiator of the United States. Let me tell you about Julie right quick. Julie has a degree in chemistry from MIT, a PhD in chemistry from Boston College, and speaks Mandarin. These are the kinds of people that work at USTR. They're the best of the best. So I refer to USTR as SEAL Team 6 of agriculture. Dozen people. I refer to USDA as the regular army.
They don't take offense to that, right?
They got everybody doing everything over there. But we're USTR. We have 12 people that do everything in the world, and they're all with 30 years of experience. And so 6 o'clock, I'm shouting down the hall to Sharon, who I'd known for 20-some years, very dear friend. I said, hey, I think I'm going to wrap it up for the day and go home. She goes, really? Is that right? And she kind of whistled down the hall. Now, I'm metaphorically speaking. All of a sudden, there were 6 people lined up outside my door of the 12. And I didn't get home till about 9 o'clock that night. And that pretty much went on for every day for the next 3 years, Paul. Pretty close.
I can imagine. Very intense environment. What was that like? I mean, it was probably really exciting for one thing. You knew there was probably going to be an end to it, so you could kind of get your mind wrapped around, okay, this is going to be really, really intense for the next 3 to 4 years. But what was that like, having that excitement and all of that going on?
And knew everybody that ever been in that job in all of those years. Knew every one of them. And a couple of them were mentors of mine. And Dr. Dick Crowder, Al Johnson, tremendous people, and absolutely brilliant at what they did. And they both said to me, Greg, you quickly realize that every day when you walk out of the building, it's one less day you have to get something done. And so there's this constant sense of urgency. And that's what you feel in those jobs is to your point. You've just got so much time, and you've got to get as many things done as you can get done. And we got hundreds of things fixed. One of the things we got fixed with wheat trade in Brazil had been languishing for 25 years. And that's one of the things I always tell people is all of the easy stuff has been done a long time ago. All of these things, we've been negotiating a trade agreement with Israel for 30 years. And the file was always on Sharon's desk all the years that she was there. These things are so difficult to do, so complex. And so then one of the things that we, did was the China Phase 1 agreement. So let me give you some metrics on that. And of course, I've explained to this 100 times, but so it was 33 negotiating sessions in the course of 2019, a year. When one negotiating session would have been here in Washington or in Beijing, it would have been a 10 or 12-hour day. So you start at 8 to 9 in the morning, and a lot of times we would go till 10 o'clock at night. That would be one of those 33 sessions. So hundreds of hours going back and forth with me. And I had a team behind me of about 20 people from the State Department and Foreign Ag Service and USTR and interpreters and all kinds of stuff. And then the Vice Minister of Agriculture of China, Han Jun, who is now the Minister of Agriculture of China, he's one of the most important people in China. Great rapport with him, spoke very good English, but in the negotiation, he wasn't allowed to speak English. Very intense. And he would have at times 40 or 50 bureaucrats behind him. And just an unbelievable. So at the end of the day, 33 negotiating sessions, we fixed 57 things in the ag trade relationship between the U.S. and China. It's 23 pages of sentences. And each sentence was like, we're fixing this, we're fixing this, we're fixing this. And very, very tedious, very, very complicated. And ultimately, in the end, we took U.S. ag exports from 26 to 38 billion a year as a result of the things that we got fixed there. So for example, the first time ever we got U.S. beef into China. I told Bob, I said, I'm going to lay down on the tracks on this. I'm the beef guy. We've never been able to sell beef to China. I think it's $1 billion market. I'm just going to insist that we get this done. And he had my back, but I was wrong, Paul. It wasn't $1 billion.
Double what you thought. Yeah. So going into this is a great example of what I really wanted to dig into. Going into this, you're looking at across the board at all the commodities. You're looking at what does China want? What do they need? What does the U.S. want? What do we need? You have all of these commodity organizations, telling you behind the scenes what they would really like to see. How do you bring all this together and prepare for a meeting like this, and then actually do the negotiations? What does that process look like?
So it takes a long time. So USTR has a list of all the problems with each ag commodity in each country. And that's their job. Is every day we have one of these people that deals with Southeast Asia. Let's say they're dealing with 15 countries. They know every single product in agriculture, what issue is impeding trade. And we are constantly, and we meet with them several times a year, approaching and discussing and how to fix issues. What are you looking for? You're looking for leverage. How do we get an action forcing event to leverage the situation to make them change? And historically, leverage would be like, okay, the president of the United States is going to Vietnam. Let's make up a thing here. So he's going over there, well, Vietnam better have some deliverables and nice things to say. Well, this is our list of what we want you to fix. That was always kind of the way it was, Paul. It was very benign and hard. And President Trump comes in and is like, whack, I'm putting a 50% tariff on you until you fix all of it. Boom, here we go. And that's the beautiful part of the leverage that this president has created that nobody else has ever done before in the history of the United States.
So that's a negotiation tactic that the other countries probably hadn't been used to in the past, right?
Yes, correct.
So your job was basically to kind of military terms secure the beachheads for Trump to land and really hit them with something big like that.
Well, so right, he provided the leverage, and so your job was to come in and fill in the space and get as much done as you could possibly get done. And that was the discussion with China was, okay, we want to fix everything we can possibly fix. So there were 57 things that we fixed. The question is, how many did the Chinese actually do? Interestingly enough, my answer would be like 53 or 4 of them. There have been a couple that haven't been quite, I think, to our satisfaction on biotechnology acceptance and things like that. But interestingly enough, when we were doing this, the vice minister told me, he said, look, some of this stuff is done by other agencies that I can't tell them other bureaucracies, I can't tell them what to do. He said, so I can fix what I have, purview over, but I can't make this other minister do this. I get it. I get it.
So your job functions didn't exactly align.
Yeah. So the way to think about this, though, I always described it as when I was on the Senate Ag Committee, we helped create the Undersecretary for Trade at USDA. So when people were asking me, well, how does this work? I said, well, think of the Chief Ag Negotiator as new and used car sales, and think of the Undersecretary for Trade as the service department. I said, so, to have a good dealership, you've got to have a really solid service department. You've got to have somebody out there servicing the customer, making sure he knows what's going on, working. And that's the Foreign Ag Service. That's what they do. They're the ones out on the ground, figuring out why this isn't working. What's the situation on the ground? Technically what's going on here. And then they try to fix it at the Foreign Ag Service and at their level. And a lot of times they do fix it. And it's very technical stuff. It's dealing with technology issues, except, inspection issues, et cetera, like that. When they can't get it fixed, then they're the white hat guys over there. When they can't get it fixed, they kick it over to us at USTR. We're the black hat people. So, Paul, my job was to walk in, kick over the table, and say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen.
You got to be the bad guy.
It's the good cop, bad cop thing. And it works. It works like crazy. Because you help your counterpart in another country know that, hey, we're not messing around here. This has got to be fixed.
Yeah. They got to know you're serious.
So that's kind of how it works. And is it if it gets to my level, it's really dug in and difficult and intractable. It takes these things are not easy to fix at that level. It takes a lot of work.
It's not just tariff. I mean, in the news, we're hearing it all the time, since the beginning of Trump's second term. Again, we've been hearing it. It's all about tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. But at the end of the day, most of the stuff that you're working on really don't have anything to do with actual tariffs themselves. It's other trade barriers that are the issue. So give us a little bit of more detail around what that looks like, some of those other issues that you were really dealing with.
So let's say that you're using a technology in agriculture and animal production that, like beef hormones, that we've used for 50 or 60 years here. And in another country, they don't know how to regulate it, can't regulate it, and so they just ban it. And that a lot of countries do that because they're like, we don't trust our own people with this stuff, so we ban it. And so then you get caught in the net. Or we have a lot of countries where I'll just say they're trying to ban something produced in China. And so we get caught in that net. And so you have to sit down and say, look, this is how we do it. This is how the Chinese do it. If you change your regulation to say this, we can get through the net and you still accomplish what you want with the Chinese, which, by the way, we totally understand. We're not blaming you. We're just like, we got to figure out how to navigate this stuff. And so that is a lot of it is what I learned in this job, Paul, is every country in the world sees their regulatory system or sees our regulatory system through the eyes of their own regulatory system.
That's very insightful.
Everybody in the world, whether you're in Chile or Indonesia or China, they think that we do it like they do it. And that's so much of the thing with China. We were explaining, this is how we do it and why. And then the bureaucracy would ask all these questions. And some of the crazy notions of what they had and why they were regulating things in China were just crazy to us. And we never knew that this was actually what the problem was until we finally, 10 o'clock at night, arguing with them, we finally shook it out of them. Literally, and the stories I could tell you were crazy. But the gentle way to say it is we were working on one particular thing in the U.S., and the Foreign Ag Service person said to her Chinese counterpart at the end of the discussion, great discussion about the technology and how it works. And she said at the end of it, she goes, oh, and if you want to know more, just Google it. What did her Chinese counterpart say? What's Google? They have no access to the outside world. They have no understanding in so many of these countries of how anybody does anything other than how they do it. And this is the challenge that we face in agriculture. It's production systems are different. Technology is different. And in a lot of places, they just don't know how to deal with the technologies that we use in pesticides and herbicides and, growth promotants, all these kind of things.
Yeah. They only know what they know, right?
Right. And that's why our folks in government get paid the big bucks is they're experts and scientists that know how to sit down and explain, we know how you do it here. This is why we do it. Here's the differences and this is how it works. This is what we need you to do.
Now, I'm guessing as you've been doing some of these trade deals in the past, there's been times where there might be one commodity or one sector of agriculture that you feel needs to be pushed more so than another in a certain region or segment. How does that, I guess, have you had that? And if so, how have you danced around that issue back at home?
Yeah, the answer is, I understand that sentiment, Paul. The answer is never.
Okay.
Why? Because I wanted it all.
You did work for Trump, right?
Right. When I walk out of there, my list of issues is a blank sheet of paper, buddy. We have successfully fixed everything at the end of the day. That's the goal. We don't leave anybody behind. That is not how we do this, let me assure you. Now, are there some at the end of the day that we just can't get there on, and at some point somebody makes a decision above my pay grade to move on? Yes. But that doesn't mean that it was that's too hard, or we're not going to do this, or they're not in favored politically at home, so we're going to throw them under the bus. No, no, no. That's never, ever part of the conversation.
Now, as data and traceability and compliance, both home and abroad, become more central to trade, do you see future trade agreements that are going to be decided by who controls the data?
It's a great question. No, I don't think so. Again, let me give you a story. On China and beef, they wanted traceability back to the farm. And we kept saying, why? And they kept saying goofy things. And I said, finally one night I said, and this is where you have to have the knowledge of the industry. I said, Vice Minister, I assume you know this, but do you understand that every box of beef that comes from the U.S. to China has a number on it, on the box? And that number connotates what beef packing plant that came from. It is, by federal law, impossible for you to ever get a box of beef from the United States that doesn't have a number on it, that doesn't tell you what federally inspected plant that came from. And so, by the way, you in China approve and sign off on the list of all the approved plants. So it is impossible. And we actually custom built a system for them. Our government did that said, it is impossible for you to ever get a box of beef without a number that you have approved. And you know what he said? He goes, really? I didn't know that. You're right. That does kind of fix the problem, doesn't it? Yeah.
And you shake your head and say, how did he not know that?
Exactly. We've been talking past each other for 6 hours, and all of a sudden it comes down to that. And again, that's a common thing in these kind of discussions is you have to figure out, okay, what is he trying to get at here and what does he want? And you go, oh, wait a minute, we're already doing that. Here's how to explain it.
So at the end of the day, it's just like anything else. It's about communication, right?
Yeah, and it's technical. As you know, ag food trade, it's complicated. These supply chains are complicated. How things work are complicated. So there's always confusion. I get it. And we do it differently than the Europeans do it. And we got into great discussions about the Europeans do it this way, and this is why we do it this way, this is why. And the vice minister was so good about, we're learning so much about all this that we didn't know. They've never really sat down with us, U.S. and China, and had these conversations. They said, we're going to begin to implement in our own way a lot of the things that we're learning in all of this. So, and here's the key point, Paul. After all that was over and it was signed and done, there were still little things that came up every day. And USTR and the Chinese, we were talking back and forth every day, fixing little things to make sure a shipment of strawberries didn't get hung up on the dock and ruined. Well, when we changed administrations after we left, the next administration came in, and I'm not casting dispersion, I'm saying this is the way it was. They just stopped talking to the Chinese. They cut it all off cold turkey. There was never another conversation for 4 years.
That doesn't work.
And then, what happened? So we're the two biggest economies in the world. We're trading, $25 to $35 billion worth of stuff. You got to talk to each other.
Yeah. And if you don't, you have issues like what we saw come up, right?
That's exactly right. If you don't, the Chinese were like, you know what? If you don't want to talk to us, we'll go somewhere else.
Yeah. And trust
of course
breaks down.
Anybody would.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense from what we saw.
And so that's my frustration is, we're not going to be best buddies. I get all that. But you got to talk to each other.
Now, we talked about some of the miscommunications or misconceptions between the parties as they negotiate. What are some of those that you feel are maybe potentially dangerous myths or miscommunications that farmers have about trade and global trade?
The biggest miscommunication is that there's some all-seeing eye that controls all of this some way, somehow.
It's just organized chaos at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. So when I left the U.S. government, I went to work for a company called Aimpoint Research that has changed names now. But this was a group of military guys. Guys that had graduated, classmates at West Point together, and two of them were colonels, 25 years in the Army. Their last assignment both for each of them successively, is they were in charge of wargaming at the Army War College. And so we took that U.S. Army war game business model to corporate America. And to do that, we designed we had the brilliant young guys, the techno guys that would design the game and the psych ops and all of that. But I was the intel guy. Here's how it works. So you fed that intel in, and then you designed the game around it. It was a blast. And we did this all over agriculture. But what I saw so often is you get a lot of farmers in particular that would get into the middle of this and be like, this game is stupid. I don't understand it. This is going on. And what I finally dawned on me after these conversations, and I went back to my military colleagues, I said, what these guys are really telling me, they don't understand how their supply chain works. And what you have to let me give you an example. Outback Steakhouse, Paul, how many times a year do they buy beef?
No idea. Every day?
Yeah. But how many times do they price it? So it takes, this is old numbers, 20-year-old numbers. It used to take about 10,000 steers a week to make the steaks for Outback Steakhouse in the United States. So they're getting steaks every day, 10,000 a week. How many times do they price it?
Probably one time.
One time.
A year. Yeah.
Why? One of the most expensive things that Outback does is print their menus.
Interesting. Yeah. So they don't want to reprint it.
So that price on that menu is set for a year. So you are the meat packer selling 10,000 steers a week of steaks, just Outback. You're buying steaks every day on the hoof, and you're selling them once a year. Explain to me the risk management system for that. Buddy, let me tell you, it's complicated. It's beyond just a little complicated. It is unbelievably complicated. And whether it's in the fruits and vegetables side of the equation, the meat side of the equation, corn and wheat and soybeans is relatively simplistic compared to all of the rest of this. These are sophisticated businesses, and that's the key. What does the U.S. consumer demand? A reliable and consistent supply. They expect somebody at Safeway that there are strawberries on that shelf every day.
365 days a year, it better be on there.
100%. Yep. So if you can't figure out if you're Safeway or who you're buying from to make that happen, guess what? Buddy, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be involved in what's going on. So there is, and then you've got to have a price that is, going to be acceptable to Safeway and the consumer as well. This is, people just take for granted the complexity of our food system in this country and the fact that we've got stuff coming from all around the world, and you have things in that grocery store that you never had when I was a kid. 40 years ago, you didn't have strawberries. Hell, you didn't have strawberries 2 months out of the year.
Yeah, so a lot of that isn't grown in the U.S. for part of the year. So how do we work that out as a sector, as a nation providing food security?
And how do you design the regulatory system behind it to make sure that you don't have somebody using a pesticide that's legal in God knows where that isn't legal here, and somebody's got an eye on that. And by the way, we're testing all of that stuff all the time. It isn't that if you have a deal, well, then it just assumes that it all works, right? Oh, no. Everything coming in is getting tested. And this, I'm not going to go into details, but let me tell you what, buddy, that was a very, very difficult conversation with the Chinese because we knew what was in their stuff and they were wanting this. And I was like, no.
That's not accepted in the U.S. Sorry, buddy. No, I understand that. I have had very minimal experience. I've gone on a couple different trade missions with my dairy co-op that have been privileged to go on, one in Southeast Asia, one in the Middle East. And just those glimpses into trade in those specific regions just blew my mind on the complexity of the system, the relationships, the issues that are specific to each region, and then how we reciprocate that trade as well. It's opened my eyes to how little I actually knew and understood about what goes on with global trade.
Well, what the beauty of ag trade is, there's a couple of key points I would make, and then we'll talk about overall trade a little bit, and I actually had this conversation with the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. here in Washington at dinner about a year and a half ago. And he said the comment, he goes, what I don't really like about U.S. farmers is they're always trying to push their products and hurt our farmers in China. And I said, that's not true, Ambassador. I said, I've been doing this for a long time. And I said, in the wheat industry, this was the case. And in dairy, it's the case. And beef, it's the case. Our goal when we're promoting U.S. ag exports is to make the pie bigger. It is to increase the consumption of dairy in China with the expectation that the domestic industry grows and expands at what they're good at. And we're sophisticated enough, we're going to figure out how to create the products fit in around the edges. So in China, for example, what do we want to do? I want to sell pizza cheese to Western style chains in China. That's not going to hurt your business. And if we get that done, that's going to expand your thing. So when you look at Mexico today in dairy, Paul, it's very interesting. We've been doing this business model for 30 years. Mexican dairy industry's percentage of their consumption is exactly the same today as it was 30 years ago. We have both grown at this level. And
the pie is much, much bigger.
The pie is much bigger. That's always, in all the years that I've done this, every commodity, that's how we view it. And once you have that conversation with them, they're like, well, that makes sense.
In my mind, it shows the differences in worldviews. And there's a joke that I heard that I really like hearing. It's a Russian Soviet guy and an American standing next to each other, and a limo drives past. The Soviet guy says, nobody should ride in a vehicle like that. And the American says, every person should drive in a vehicle like that.
So can I tell you, one of my great first trade stories is my mentor, who's still in the business in Chicago. He was giving a presentation on wheat supply and demand and hedging and speculating all this in the Soviet Union. This was way back in the day. And he went all through it, hedgers, speculators, futures, options, the whole 9 yards. And he said at the end of this is a great story. At the end of the presentation, he said, any questions? And the Soviet general in the back of the room, he says, Dr. Tierney, I just have one question. What do you do with the speculator when you catch him? Classic.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah.
Exactly.
We know what they would do.
Story. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But bringing it back home to this President Trump, it was Bob that explained to me. He said, "Let me explain to you Donald Trump on trade." Greg, is very simple. And when I've explained this to my kids who are 27 and 24, they kind of lose their minds. They're like, "This is crazy." But it's very simple. Donald Trump can't stand the notion that you buy a cheap washing machine from China, and if it breaks, you throw it away and you buy a new one. That is just an anathema to him. He can't wrap his head around it. He believes that you should buy a nice washing machine that was built in the U.S. that, yeah, is more expensive, but if it breaks, you buy the part and you fix it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. And we used to be that way in this country, and we've gotten away from that. And that's what he wants to have that manufacturing middle class base in the U.S. Bob Lighthizer was from the Rust Belt in Ohio, where it's all been hollowed out. This was personal to him in this regard. I get it. Because I come from a town in Kansas where we lost our meatpacking plant, and once it's gone, everything goes away.
Yeah, let's dig into that before we have to finish up here. So obviously that was one of the things that kind of became clear to you about the overarching history of trade in the U.S. And as you developed into this role. After World War II, that shifted from what we were doing before World War II, obviously. And then where did that next shift happen between World War II and what you're talking about? And what made that happen? Yeah,
so after World War II, the whole notion is we're going to bring peace in the world through trade. And so we're going to lower our barriers to trade, and we're going to facilitate trade around the world. And we're all, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so we lowered our tariff barriers, and everything worked really, really well with regard to this until, I would argue, not China emerged, but President Xi in China emerged. And so let's back up here. What Donald Trump believes is we have to have a U.S. industrial policy. So in other words, to be competitive in the world, you have to have a competitive tax policy, regulatory policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and actually the tariffs. That's like the most minor thing of all of it. What you're really doing with the tariffs is kind of reciprocity, keeping everybody even. Now, what he also does with the tariffs is use it as leverage, as we've described. What he also uses with tariffs is with China, because here's the fundamental problem with China. They're not a market-based economy. They don't operate based upon a monthly profit and loss statement like a firm that has stock that trades on Wall Street. If they want to command and take over the steel market in the world, they can do this. I actually, years ago, won't get into it a lot, I was sitting next to the head of aluminum procurement at Miller Coors, and he was talking to me about the world aluminum market and how China just intends on taking it over. And so when you have that kind of situation, you've got to deal with that, or you're not going to have any industry left anywhere in the world. And I think Donald Trump was the first one in the world to stand up and say, hey, whoa, time out. And now what do you see? The rest of the world, now Mexico is putting tariffs on China. The Europeans or even the Germans are saying, whoa, on China, helping people realize that that's not how we operate in the world. And it's dangerous, actually.
It is, yeah. Long term, it could create a lot of issues, like we've seen with the precious metals industries. Right now, that's becoming a big thing, and Trump's trying to bring that back on shore more from a national security standpoint.
And certainly from a food standpoint, food security is national security. That was the mantra of working with the West Point guys that I worked with. That's what we ran around talking about. Is we have to. A third of all the phosphate fertilizer exports in the world come from China. Here a couple of years ago, they said, well, we're just not going to export phosphate fertilizer anymore. They did. Well, okay. The U.S., you better get your supply chain sorted out. So we would war game this stuff out and say, okay, what's the plan here? And right now in this administration, these are the conversations that are ongoing. What do we need to do here from a tax standpoint? And so we've got our taxes now are competitive in the world. It's drawing investment in. Now, how do you get your regulatory environment in? So you can actually build the facility here to do what it is you want to do. So you're not Palisades, California, right?
You can actually get something built in under a 20-year time frame.
Exactly. These are, and then from a regulatory standpoint, are we going to be treated in a way that we can compete in the world? For environmentally, et cetera. These are key elements of having a productive and successful growing economy in the U.S. It's that basic and fundamental at the end of the day.
Yeah. So when you really look at trade, you're looking at all of those aspects, and I think that's something that a lot of administrations in the past have not successfully done.
Well, they have an agenda of we want to hyper regulate this, that, and the other, and pretty soon it doesn't just affect that segment. You throw the whole thing in the ditch.
You have a lot of adverse consequences.
Now, in dairy, this we'll kind of wrap up with this. We have $11 billion in new dairy processing investment in the U.S. 2023, 24, 25, 26, maybe into 27 a little bit. So I'm not talking about, we have this idea because of Trump, we're going to build a new plant. No. These are plants that are operational in some cases. Some of them, one of them I know starts next month. They've been built. Almost all of them will be built and running within the next year. $11 billion worth. Why? Because everybody in the world looks around. We need more protein, beef, pork, poultry, dairy. You look around. Are we going to build more dairy in Europe? Nope. They're maxed out. New Zealand? Nope. They're maxed out. Australia? Nope. South America ain't going to a tropical climate and raising dairy cows. Ain't happening. That rumen doesn't work that way. So the whole world has realized the one place on earth you can grow and expand is the U.S. $11 billion worth. So this is an investment in U.S. dairy farmers, Paul. This is an investment in the future. So, and if we're going to make this work, you've got to have the right tax, regulatory, the value of the dollar has to be right. If it's too high, we can't compete. All of these things have to come together to make this work. And this is a guy that gets this.
Because he's been on the other side of the table.
He's been on all sides of the table. That's right. And he's dealt, when you do this, what he does all around the world, why do I go here and not here? He understands all the elements of it.
Perfect. Well, one more thing before you go. If you could say one thing about global dairy, or not just dairy, but global trade to U.S. farmers that you believe but barely would say in public, what would that be?
Well, the one thing I say in public is the global supply of protein in the world will come nowhere near meeting the demand going forward. So, to me, the business model of exporting soybeans to China versus the Brazilians is just a bad business model. You've got to go up the value chain. Beef, pork, poultry, dairy, and biofuels. That's where we can compete like crazy. In our livestock industry, there isn't hardly anybody in the world that can compete with us. We're better than anybody else. And on the dairy side, I firmly believe that's true. But that requires us to, and when I say this in a lot of speeches, that get that Illinois dairy farmer that says, well, I'm not going back to growing pigs. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have to think about what do we do collectively to move up the value chain to add value to what we're doing. And so we kind of have to expand our mindset here a little bit about where the future opportunities are. And that's the cool thing that I see about dairy, Paul, is what are we exporting the bejesus out of now that 5 years ago wasn't even a thing?
WPI.
Milk pink protein concentrates.
Yeah.
Whey. There are all these high-end, there are all kinds of new technologies, new processing.
Stuff we used to dump.
What's that? Yes. So we need to think about two things. What is that next thing? We've got Fairlife, ultra filtered, ultra processed. We haven't even scratched the surface on that stuff in the world market. My goodness.
They can't even keep up with domestic demand.
Exactly. So there's that. The other thing is that on the dairy checkoff side of the equation, it used to be a lot of advertising. The checkoff today is doing so much good research on the research that it takes, that then you take to the venture capital person, then to develop the product that then you develop into the marketplace. And what I mean by that is, what is the coolest research that in all my years of checkoffs, this is the fourth checkoff I've been involved with, wheat, soybeans, beef, and now dairy. It is the relationship that we have with the Mayo Clinic and the research we're doing on what does each one of these specific things in milk do in terms of human health. Specifically, vitamin D does what? Vitamin A does what? Riboflavin does what? Specifically in terms of human health. We're doing that research so we understand that. That is critical in terms of the things that we learn from that. They're saying, well, why don't we develop a product that does this? Why don't we develop a supplement that does this, where you can take this and go with this and do this? That basic elemental research, somebody's got to do it.
Now, the brands can do the marketing, but they're probably not going to do all of that research for the whole industry.
And the companies will do the new product development. Right. Once you give them the foundational research, that's the piece that to me is an absolutely critical component of growing your industry.
Right. And I think we've got that in line better than we've ever had.
I agree with you. It's cool to see. I think we're spot on with what we're doing.
Well, Gregg, I really appreciate taking time today to talk with us about trade from an insider's perspective. It's very valuable. Where can people find out more about the work that you're doing today and where you're at?
Well, I think the National Milk website is a good thing. U.S. Dairy Export Council website, there's a ton of information on that. This year, I was just looking. Here's the trade data right here through September. Looking at all this, we're up through September. We're up 15%. We're up 45% into Japan, 34% in South Korea. Believe it or not, we're actually up 73% into Europe. No, what are we selling? You know, they understand for the dairy farm.
Who would have thought that one, huh?
Not me. I gave actually a huge presentation in January of this year at the USDA Outlet Conference where I just ripped the Europeans about how they're not letting us sell them anything. What have we sold a mountain of to Europe this year? We're selling butter to Australia because of the fat we have and the surplus that we have and the markets that we have. Again, markets change. We can turn on a dime and do this kind of stuff. So my point is this, 18% of U.S. milk production today is exported in some sort of product. 18%. Our all-time record a couple of years ago in exports was $9.5 billion. So of that $175 billion, 9.5 of that is dairy. In 2025, we are all over that record, $9.5 billion. We're going to be, by my calculations right now, it was 9.46 is what it looks like.
And that's through September.
Yeah. If you extrapolate the last 3 months of the year, it comes out 9.46.
Okay.
So we're all over the record right now if we keep this pace.
Well, as a dairy farmer, that's what I like to hear.
Yeah. And that's so I'm not, just blowing sunshine, Paul, when I'm being optimistic. There's actually, I am optimistic. I think we've got we're doing great things. Oh my goodness, do we have a lot of milk?
We've got a lot of milk, hopefully a lot more processing in the next couple of years. Right. And I would agree with the sentiment that you mentioned. As I traveled around the world the last 2 years, there's no better place in the world in the next decade to produce more milk in, or beef or other protein.
Let's go.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Gregg. Appreciate you being on today.
You bet, Paul. Thanks. Take care.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode with Gregg Doud. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you have, please share it with somebody that you know. I think this is a very insightful topic that you're probably not going to hear very many other places. Now, coming up, next week is going to be our last episode for 2025. And then I'm going to be taking a break for a couple of weeks to spend some time with the family during the holidays. Now, as always, I love it when people reach out to me, give me feedback on the podcast, and have any questions for me. So hit me up with any questions or comments you have on the podcast. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller. Thanks again for listening to the AgCulture Podcast.